Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you all, and I appreciate your interest in Africa's development and in supporting my work. And obviously, a lot of thanks to Megan, Cherise, and the rest of our crew for putting on this show together. We'll be speaking about what I'm doing here as an MLK visiting scholar. And the plan is simple. I'll tell you who I am, tell you a bit my connection with the MLK Scholars Program. Then I'll talk about the focus of my work while here, and will motivate and explain what exactly I'm doing. Obviously, it'll take a bit of iteration. As we all know, you start somewhere, but you end up somewhere else. And then, of course, I'll talk a bit about the broader interests at MIT and leave some time for Q&A. So I think I'll speak for about 40 minutes or something like that. Who am I? As Megan just mentioned, I'm the 9th governor of the central bank. Spent 8 years, 2 terms there. And before that, I'd worked for 20 years at the IMF and worked as a government official, economist. And my interest has always been on Africa's transformation. That's what brought me to economics. And it isn't just an academic issue, but rather changing the lives of people. That's really what has kept me going throughout my career. I'm an economist, and I would say spent a lot of time doing policy work, not from an academic perspective, but actually from the trenches. And we'll benefit from that as we write what we are doing. Obviously, I'm an African and have a very keen interest in sort of the development of Africa from that perspective. And clearly, the issue of Africa's transformation, unfortunately, most of us, the consensus view is that it's all doomed. And I want to say right at the beginning, I do not share that consensus. Yeah, and that's why we're here. We are doing research while at MIT as an MLK fellow, and hopefully I'll write a book which tentatively labeled Africa at 10x. But who exactly am I? So it's probably a picture is worth 1,000 words. So in this, I'll go through 4,000 words. So the one on the left is, actually that's me, the guy in the suit. The guy in the t-shirt is Eliud Kipchoge, the greatest marathoner of all time. And we are looking at a mural which is in a neighboring building of him after he had ran the marathon in 1:49:50. And at the bottom there, you can read it. It says, no human is limited. And that is really the inspiration of many of the things that he did. The gentleman that is wearing that funny hat with me is actually the first Kenyan governor of the Central Bank of Kenya. So he's number 2, I'm number 9. And he's going to be celebrating, on March 11th, he'll be celebrating his 101st birthday, 101, that gentleman. So I look up to him for his courage and resilience. There are a lot of lessons from that generation. And then the photo in the middle there of that crowd, that's me in the beanie cap, climbing Kilimanjaro. So we were like 30 of us, and again, maybe setting us targets on something difficult, and there we were. Now, on the right-hand side is a book that I recently published called Brothers in Arms, and it talks about unusual communication. And here, basically, the point I make in that book is that it is important to communicate to the general public as a central bank governor. It's not enough to just talk to the markets, etc. And that is important, and it's an important starting point for what I'm doing here. So motivating the issue of why am I here as an MLK scholar, why this? So first, my deep gratitude to my hosts, Esther Duflo and Tavneet Suri, for, I think, well, first identifying the need that I had for a safe space to work on my book, and obviously offered the possibility of being an MLK fellow, which I jumped at, I needed that safe space, and really, it's a deep honor for me to be associated with both the MLK, MLK Junior and Phyllis Wallace. Actually, technically, I'm an MLK fellow and Phyllis Wallace, visiting scholar. And Phyllis Wallace will talk about her in a minute. She was an MIT professor and also a Yale, one of actually the first female MIT professor in Sloan, right? So anyway, we'll talk about that later. Why MIT? I think there are three general points here. First is that we have a difficult problem. And I hope within 5 minutes you'll see that this is a really difficult problem that we are looking at. It's challenging, and it is also has consequences. And the second is the intellectual rigor that MIT stands for, and access to research that is around here, JPAL and other places. A lot of new research has come up, and I think being in MIT will really facilitate access to those things. And then, of course, being an MLK scholar, the program really encourages us to look with courage at these monumental issues. And again, hoping to change society, not just in a small way, but in a really transformational way. So now we need to motivate the problem. And I think the first question I would raise to you is, how much change can take place in a generation, one generation? Now, we are economists, so we think of change in terms of growth, GDP growth, and things like that. Yes, I do agree it's not the only measure. But the issue is, in one generation, can we really have significant change? And looking at other places, how much change has taken place in one generation in Africa? I think the problem has been that we have 1.4 billion people that we've been unable to lift out of poverty. 1.4 billion. That's a huge number. Compare it to the population of the US, 300 something million. So, and if you look at the numbers, you can see that actually we've been left behind. There's a graph of GDP per capita. The blue line at the bottom is sub-Saharan Africa, and you can see it hasn't grown by much. And all the other regions have grown dramatically, particularly East Asia. This is just sub-Saharan Africa by itself, pulling it out, and you can see that there's a bit of a problem over here, right? Something happened here. There was all this growth, and then we all went down. And then, fine, this is the later period. This is the globalization period. The point is, for this, I would make the point that a lot of us get very excited with labels like, or when somebody says that of the top 20 fastest growing countries, 10 of them are in Africa. Frankly, the question is, well, we need to have all of them in there. Yeah, 20, you're supposed to be excited about that. I think that's a very low bar that we are setting for ourselves. So I hope I can convince you that we need to do more than just that. This was GDP in constant prices. This is just the growth rate and I think the blue line is probably the one to see that something happened in since 2000, so we accelerated. And then, of course, there's the deep there of the global financial crisis, and then, of course, COVID. But basically, we are not doing well. We are definitely not doing well. So the thing also to remember is that there has been a lot of people, the numbers are astounding in terms of people who are living below the poverty line, who are in extreme poverty. You can see on the left-hand side, you can see where yellow line is Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. You can see it has remained up there, right, above 50%. And all the other regions, particularly if you look at East Asia, I mean, it begins much higher and it's way down out here, right? So that declined, but somehow sub-Saharan Africa has remained up. If you look at this also as a number, so in terms of numbers of poor, and you can see everyone else, the numbers are coming down, and this is East Asia. But Africa, actually the numbers are rising. So the idea that we should be excited by growth being high relative to other countries, I think that is clearly something that we cannot accept to be, that to be the standard. We need to do a lot more to lift all these people out of this poverty that they are in. Now, other numbers are also quite surprising. Mortality rate under 5, 68 deaths per 1,000 live births. That's the highest in the world. And it accounts for more than 50% of the under 5 mortality. This is significant in terms of just the human cost of the situation we have in sub-Saharan Africa. About 50% of African girls do not complete or never attended high school. That's significant cost also to the economy, if you think of it that way. A huge loss. Forget even the human cost of it, right? I mean, we have cousins, we have relatives that are in this situation. So it's significant. And then, of course, we also know that 2/3 of the population depend on agriculture, and the yields are low and highly vulnerable to let's say, rain, etc., because all the agriculture is rain-fed, right? So to us, there are significant problems in Africa that we have to deal with. It's not just income, but income is obviously a significant driver and a result of some of these things. Then we ask ourselves, okay, so these things are happening, but what about the potential? Can we say that Africa has significant potential? And the answer is yes. Suffices to say that 20% of the global land mass is Africa. About 1/3 of the world's known mineral reserves are in Africa. So it's not because there aren't resources that can be transformed. In terms of population as well, median age is 19. And that's way lower than the other countries, China and US. And of course, we know that by 2050, based on various projections, about 35% of the world population, youth, between 15 and 24 years old, will be in Africa. And about 25% of the world's workforce will be in Africa. So in terms of labor, global labor, in terms of markets, global markets, it's Africa. No wonder somebody said that Africa is really the continent of the 21st century. but it cannot just become the continent of the 21st century without certain transformation that we are gonna talk about. Now, there's also a lot of plans for infrastructure, and there is, importantly, the possibility of leapfrogging in terms of technologies, yeah? Mainly because we don't have the legacy technologies that one could think of, yeah? And so one could move directly to sort of to the frontier. Now, it's easy to say, but the question is, will that happen? So, question then is a lot of potential, but will it always be a continent with a lot of potential? So I want to motivate the problem again by mentioning a bit a selection of literature. These are some of the key or sort of more popular titles, if you may, in policy circles. We have heard about Jeff Sachs, The End of Poverty. This is obviously maybe 20 years ago. But I think the point he made that there are 7 aspects that need to be dealt with, and Africa has been stuck, unable to get to the fast rung of in order to get into the ladder, the globalization ladder. And according to him, there was need for aid, some sort of aid from foreign aid that will push the countries to the bottom rung, and then they'll accelerate thanks to globalization. Now, this was around 2005, and that was a time at the beginning of this century when there was a lot of discussion about aid. And that's really what this ended up being, the importance of foreign aid. And I think the names that came after that, particularly William Eastry, debunked this thought of aid, and in effect, the idea that aid isn't aid. And his book really goes through that in an elegant way. Paul Collier, interestingly, also from the same perspective, did make the point that there are 4 elements, 4 poverty traps that our countries have fallen into, and indeed, so these development traps: conflict, natural resources, they are landlocked, poor governance. So somehow they need to be helped to get out of this. And again, in his own way, he talked about foreign aid, and even mentioned, having military presence in some of those countries, foreign military supervised by the United Nations, et cetera, et cetera. Those were, in my view, heroic times. Yeah, we've moved since then. I'm not going to go through all the others, but I think we all remember the book Why Nations Fall, and in effect, it talks about institutions, talking about these inclusive institutions, and if they are inclusive, they will help the country develop. And if they are extractive, they will help just a small elite and not the rest of the country. Now, in a sense, the problem with that is you only know after the fact what is actually a inclusive or extractive institution. Yeah, he does mention that an inclusive institution should have. It will lead to protection of property rights, etc. But I think the point is we've also seen other institutions grow, or other countries grow, that have not followed precisely what one would suggest from this. I'm going to move on to the others, but I think it is important to mention 2 other elements here. The one by Abjit and Esther Duflo, Poor Economics, which was an excellent book, reminds us of that poor people are not just like us, only poorer. Yeah? They live lives that are really different from our lives. And I think this is something which should be obvious to all of us. But I think the book, obviously with a lot of technical work that is available in JPAL, has laid out and explained in a rather cogent fashion. I like the document by the World Bank, the 21st Century Africa. Why? Because it's actually a sequel to another document that they prepared in 2000. I think it was in 2000. And basically they laid out what they said or what they thought would be needed to develop Africa. Then 25 years later, they write another document, which is pretty much like the first one, only with a few improvements, like, oh no, now we need to talk about green growth, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it shows the difficulty in this whole space, yeah? And frankly, all the IFIs and indeed other large institutions such as the African Union have all put forward some thought in what is it that we need to do. So there isn't an absence of thinking. Yeah, I mean, let's be clear. It's not because there are no ideas on the table. There are a lot of ideas, but somehow the ideas haven't taken root. Now, I want to motivate the problem in a different way, which is to tell you the consensus. So this is a pictorial approach, okay? So looking at the covers of The Economist, that famous magazine, and I went back to, I don't know, like to 2000, and then just picked the covers that had things to do with Africa, and then just put them together here. Now, I've left out some because there's sort of like duplicate issues, etc. But I think it is clear. The first one is this thing of hopelessness, right? We are stuck in this space that we are hopeless. War, Sudan, dictators, corruption. Then there was that time when there was a lot of excitement, Africa Rising. It corresponds to the time that I indicated, maybe when Africa was really soaring with globalization and aspiring Africa. That was all the discussion about the growth rates, meaning Africa, top 10 or top 12 fastest growing countries in the world, etc. Needless to say, always falling back into war. And more recently, the issue of, a sort of a rush to grab the resources in the continent, and also discussion. The last one is more about capitalism. Can we actually somehow have, it was actually in 2015, March 2015, can we actually have those institutions that actually ensure that the markets work, et cetera, et cetera. So these are things that you can say, this is a consensus of Africa. That is from the outside. But putting it differently, what are the issues? And if you put them in this sort of visual way, I think the first one is a discussion or elements relating to macro policy, right? So these are, if you think of the IMF, think about the World Bank, et cetera. I mean, why Africa is not succeeding is because maybe they have not been doing the right thing, poor policies, et cetera. And one can argue, okay, fine, that's part of the so-called Washington consensus. But I think there's an element to it, yeah? There's obviously an element of importance of good policies. And we will discuss this in the book at one point. But I think the point is, it's not just from the perspective of the external, let's say, IFIs, but also from the perspective of policymakers. they need to appreciate that, yes, there will be, it is important to have good policies in place. But that's part of the consensus that we do need to put in place good policies. Infrastructure, well, again, this is something that is clear. Infrastructure, institutions, you know, or you could put it differently. We have a problem because we have poor infrastructure. We have a problem because we don't have strong institutions. And one can discuss what we mean really by strong institutions. Are you talking of, you know, markets? Are you talking of central banks? Are you talking all that? But I think it's lumped into this issue of institutions, of building institutions. Technology, obviously that's an important one. I mean, if you look at agriculture, the discussion always about they use poor technology. Yeah, we haven't mechanized, etc. So there's a whole element there. Corruption and war. Those are elements that will always be there, and I think both Jeff Sachs and Paul Collier did mention those in different ways. But I think the point here is that, yes, they are there, but we have to also deal with them in some ways. But appreciate that conflict is not specific to Africa. That I think it is important. So for instance, the conflict that is taking place now in Ukraine. Yeah. Now, it is true, we also see the conflict in DRC. Now, both are conflicts, but I think the issue is the sense of the conflict in Africa remains, quote unquote, endemic to us. And I think we need to have a conversation on that. Then the other issues on culture, resources, etc. But to me, this is sort of the element of the consensus looking inside, looking into Africa. It gets us stuck in poverty, but before that, it also generates high cost of doing business and doing anything in Africa and high risk. So in the center there, it relates to the financial sector, right? So if you think about the borrowing costs, or for that matter, think of you know, the risk that investors have to sort of share and deal with in terms of working in that, I mean, lending, etc. So that is, I think, how those are the things that I think, in terms of looking inside from outside, are part of the consensus. So what are we proposing to do? We are proposing to write a book that targets the audience, that the target audience is the public in Africa. This is not a book that will have, let's say, well, just to remain in the shelf. The idea is to catalyze a discussion of what matters most for them. I want it to benefit from my experience as a policymaker and describe the situation, the conflicts that I have seen or would think of, which I think at times appear baffling to external agents looking in. So why do governments not do the right thing? And why is it, and not just governments, why do businesses not do the right thing? What really are the conflicts that they are dealing with? And then we'll flag the first steps, as it were, to deal with some of these issues. We'll also benefit from the work that we've seen and we are looking at, the new applied research on development issues. And I think there's a lot of that in the context of the MIT resources and the community in general. So I want to explain it a little. So that's the approach, but I want to explain this a little more just by way of example. So this is what, let's call this the clash of the titans, right? So we all know of the three sets of people, of actors in Africa, or for that matter, in any country, but I think much more so in Africa. We have the governments, the policymakers, you have the business community, and then you have civil society. And each one of these is navigating or is pushing to have a certain outcome that is important for them and within a given time period. So for instance, the discussion between government and the business community, right? This. So first you have, let's think of what the business communities try and push the government on. They complain about high taxes, poor infrastructure, poor competitiveness, like the exchange rate, or for that matter, the price of electricity, or governance and accountability. So please, deal with all these things. This is your typical discussion when you meet the private sector, always. And then you have the government who push back and sort of say, oh no, you guys are stuck with concessions. You're always asking for concessions. You haven't done much in terms of employment. Employment isn't rising. The quality and cost of production is poor. That is the discussion that takes place, for instance, in the context of the budget, the pre-budget discussions when the government goes out and sort of, you can have that again and again, year after year, year after year. The balance will be struck somewhere in there. Taxes will be provided, some concessions will be given. Maybe there'll be some concession here in terms of competitiveness. And in a worst case scenario, the private sector will be even given a sort of a favorable exchange rate. And they won't mind, they'll walk away with it. So I'm making the point that that is the discussion that goes on. On this side, between government and civil service, I think it is clear. So the civil society, is things like the CSOs, influencers, etc. And they will always complain. They'll complain about state capture, governance, poor governance, corruption, etc. Health education, the judiciary process isn't working. And very poor social protection. The government, on the other hand, will always make the point that, we are making certain decisions because we are looking at everything. You guys are only very one issue people, right? There's no comprehension. You don't have a comprehensive view of everything. So yes, we hear you, but you need to take a general view. In this, I'm reminded of a certain minister who did mention that it was a bit like talking to them. He was actually talking about a parliamentarian, and talking to them is a bit like being savaged by a dead sheep. Now that maybe has allusions to other things, but the point is that they are not it's just sloganeering in his mind, right? So anyway, so that is another element that we need to sort of bear in mind. Here I think it's straightforward. Businesses are pushed to do more in terms of benefits, employment, etc. And then they say, no, but we are not doing charity, we are businesses. So, you have to cut us some slack on this. Now, I raise this, I present this to you to show you the sort of the tensions that are in there, and actually to make 2 points. In all this, you don't have the population. So nobody here, you could say, really represents the population. And in some sense, these guys, the government say, we have them in mind. But where is that coming from? Or the civil society will say, we do have the population in mind. Business community will say, well, yeah, when we do all these things, we actually also have the people in mind. That, to me, is one of the issues that is significant in terms of moving forward. Somehow, the population needs to have agency. They have to be in these discussions in some ways. So that's one point. The second point is the discussion about when all this is in this discussion, there's no sense of long-termness, right? Over here, we are discussing taxes, etc., or budgets. Here also, similarly, there's no sense of, okay, what's going to happen in 5 years, 10 years? Where are we leading the country to? Now, it's true we have abandoned sort of planning as economists, but I think there's something there that is missing that needs to be brought to the table, and I'll mention it in a moment in a different way. Think about the medium-term objectives. Every one of those three elements, the government, the businesses, and indeed also the civil society, they all have medium-term objectives. So think about, for instance, the government. The government will hold discussions about macro stability in the context of the budget. They definitely want social stability, and they want job opportunities. They have their own legacy projects, but all these are not, they don't put the same weight on all these things. And frankly, government could say that they are doing something on jobs, creating job opportunities, but in reality, it may not turn out that way. Meaning their most important thing is social stability and legacy projects. And the legacy project could be, could be a white elephant. Nowadays, we don't have too many white elephants, but I was struck that 4 countries in the East African region are all building large airports. They're all within 1.5 hours of each other. So I said, how will that happen? We don't travel that much. I mean, you don't have a 787 between Kigali and Nairobi. It doesn't work that way. Yeah? I mean, you don't have that much travel. But somehow, the projects have started. And okay, so those are legacy projects. But also from their perspective, it may just be the legacy project is me. If you think about corruption, I mean, that's the legacy project. I want to enrich myself before I'm done, before my time is up, or whatever else it is. So the legacy projects are not necessarily aligned with society. And of course, they care about social stability, but they care about social stability when, let's say, the situation is unavoidable. So think about the Gen Z protests, right? So then they have to deal with things to deal with it. But as long as it's not immediate, that they'll ignore. So in some sense, I'm caricaturing the way the government sort of thinks through these issues to show you that they don't have the same, everything here is not in the same, let's say, weight, right? And if you think also about the businesses care about macro stability. They care about social stability as well. But I think for them, the most important thing is the legacy project that they have. They want to run their business. They want the business to be there in 10 years or whatever else it is. So they are similar but distinct. So I think this is really the way that those issues are the ones that we'll need to thread through in terms of discussing how development or transformation will take place in our countries. So moving on to the next thing. So now what this is really what we'll say in the book, hopefully. I think we are convinced that the building blocks of sustainable, inclusive growth need to be in place. right? So the issues about macro stability and all that, the issue of generating enough quality jobs for the youth, that is, in some sense, how would I say, it's now or never. We have to deal with it now and have those jobs generated. Now, by the way, they have to be quality jobs. So when we think about even manufacturing, et cetera, or services, it is important to appreciate that the jobs themselves have to be quality, right? Of some quality that they provide livelihood, not just an income, but also a sense of self-worth of these people. Now, this is something that we'll have a lot of fun with, I'm sure. The issue of agriculture and services. Where is manufacturing in all this? And that is because a lot of people have, there are different views, but I think the view that agriculture and services really are the way to go in terms of alleviating poverty, lifting people out of poverty. After all, I mentioned 2/3 of the population derive their livelihood from agriculture. So how else are we going to go forward if we abandon that? Yeah. So in some sense, there's something to discuss there. The issue of businesses embracing their responsibility on creating jobs. I didn't mention it, but in that whole sort of medium-term priorities, businesses need to feel that it is important for them to generate jobs. And not just for now, but in the long run. So whatever they do, there has to be that sort of forward-looking sense. Yeah. And I think this is important when you think about the concessions that you, as a policymaker, the concessions you give to, let's say, a business, right? So think about, for instance, hotels, right? A hotel, Hilton or whoever comes in and sort of say, listen, in order for me to put X number of rooms in this place, I need these concessions. Well, the point is that you need to sort of tell them, okay, fine, look, there's a sunset, hard sunset this day, or how many years? Why? Because we need employment to be developed in particular ways, in terms of number, quality, et cetera, not just by you, but by others. So those other jobs will have to come from somewhere, either you or others. So I think the point here is that responsibility has to be there. And think about the responsibility of banks, for instance, as well. They are not just making money. They need to feel that they have a responsibility in the society to make society develop. So that is important. And then I mentioned this in passing also, the issue of having clarity about the long-term consequences of policy. And I think this is something that is much more, I think is more important than we make it seem. Yeah? So for instance, that example of the concessions to a hotel or whatever else it is, the idea of the policies will have long-term consequences. So think through them and explain it, lay it out so that others can see, whether it is you or others that come after you, what those long-term consequences are and how to deal with them. I mentioned the issue of the citizens. And in some sense, this is probably the starting point of everything, their agency. Until the citizens are actually deploying and exploiting their agency in various ways, I don't think we're going to go far. And I don't mean just in the context of the ballot. Yeah, it's true, but the turnout is kind of in virtually all African countries is falling. But I think the issue is much broader than that. Agency also in discussing policies, not just letting the civil society to do the quote unquote heavy lifting. So in the end, all these elements will have a confluence, and with the power of compounding, in 30 years, it can be 10x. Now, I mentioned the power of compounding, but you see, the point is also there are shocks. Yeah, there are shocks that will come. So you may not get 8% nominal growth, but I think the point, or every single year. So you need to have the other elements in place. And this is with regard to, for instance, the safety nets, the social safety nets, and indeed also the financial safety nets, which is also important for this to work out. So this is the rough draft. Don't hold my feet to the fire on this one. But this is the rough draft. Basically, it just talks about the legacy issues. I mean, whether we combine them or not, I don't know. That is a matter for much later. But then we'll talk about the challenges and opportunities, you know, and then finally sort of deal with these sort of moonshot issues, you know, things that need to happen. For instance, I mentioned this thing about the private sector, agriculture and services, social capital, infrastructure, all those things, we need to sort of deal with them in some way. As an example, faulty macroeconomics. So this is really debunking the Washington consensus, as we call it, and anything else that may be the simplistic way of that we as economists at times deal with these issues, right? But again, as I mentioned earlier, we need to also explain to the policymakers that they need to do the right thing in terms of have strong policies, strong macro policies. Yeah. It is true the Washington consensus talks also about making the markets work. They talk about macro critical institutions like central banks, you know, capital markets authorities, revenue authorities, etc. And in that sense, you know, the disengagement of government from the economy. As always, mind you, there's so much to talk about here, you know, in terms of if we needed to, it could probably be an entire book, but anyway, that's for others to write. The issue of structural reform often was always thrown as a sort of everything else, yeah. So, yeah, that will be done, that's structural reform. Land reform, that's structural reforms. All those things. But in some sense, it's something that has to be done, but it has to be also front and center in the entire sort of transformation of the country. I mentioned earlier about social safety nets, etc., which are very important in dealing with the shocks that would come, right? Now, I think we as economists would generally have a broad brush approach. Okay, we need insurance. Yeah, so let's get some sort of insurance for society. Let's get some health, whatever, unemployment insurance. And I think that's where we go wrong. And we need to look a little, maybe even the book Poor Economics and other work that has been done in JPL indicates that maybe there's a lot more to be done. So why is it that a lady who sells whatever, fruits, doesn't want insurance? What's going on there? Is it that the price is wrong? Or is the price is too high? It may not even be an issue of price. So I think the point is the objective is clear, but how you get from here to there is where the discussion really needs to take place. I mentioned earlier about this assessment of long-term impact of policies. This, I think, is extremely important. And I don't think we are doing enough of that in everything that we do. Speaking as a central bank, ex-central banker, but anyway, once a central banker, always a central banker, so you can't get it out of yourself, right? mind you, central bankers are the only people that are kind of, they're always looking at the worst case scenario. They're like mothers, yeah? Always the worst case scenarios. So it's a nice day out here. Only a central banker will tell you, yeah, but it may snow in the evening. But so we tend to be more worried about risks, etc. Anyway, I was going to make the point that the issues that, for instance, we as central bankers think of, banks, or for that matter, even payment service providers, when you provide them with certain, licenses, etc., do we actually look at the long-term objective, long-term impact of those policies? We're about to finish, I think. I can see Cherie telling me that's about time. Oh, we already passed time. I'm sorry. So, okay, so I'll be very quick then with the rest, but mentorship, what have I been doing? What will I be doing? This, I think, is something that is extremely important, and I've been involved in various seminars. And for me, I do believe in this thing of providing a safe space to enable the mentees find and nurture their unique talents. The rest is just involvement in everything else, right? It's sort of a residual, just like structural reform, everything else, right? I think we conclude. I'm not gonna talk much about this, but I think the only point to make here is that these are difficult questions we are dealing with, and we will look at them with courage and a sense of resilience, and hopefully with everybody around us, we'll succeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much.